Perfect. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and get started. So in terms of key components of lawn care, what are we going to discuss today? There are four primary actions which we'll focus on today: watering, mowing, fertilizing, and repairing the lawn. Now, there is certainly more to lawn care than just these four basics, right? And so I would keep an eye out for, we'll be hosting an order of operations webinar, I believe next week. We'll have the calendar pulled up later during this webinar, but that will provide a bit more of a comprehensive approach in terms of other actions to complete and when to do so. These are just the main steps to get started for the season. But before we dive into this, I would like to take a step back and essentially consider what the season is going to look like, right? And so this is not something that needs to be memorized, or not even necessarily a specific resource that I would keep in mind over the course of the year, but it is beneficial to take a step back and consider what is the season going to look like. So right now, for the majority of cool season lawns, it's the winter, right? And so during the winter time, very low energy being required to essentially maintain the lawn, right? We aren't watering, we aren't mowing, we're not fertilizing. So this is really an ideal time to essentially take a step back, come up with a plan for the rest of the season, and just essentially prepare. As the temps start to warm up, I would say once the daytime temps are more consistently in the 50-degree range, I would start to look to start warming up the lawn, right? So essentially prepping your equipment, auditing your sprinkler system, sharpening your mower blade, preparing for that first mow, preparing your watering schedule, fertilizer applications, etc. But this still may be just a bit early to really be focusing on applying fertilizer and essentially kicking into high gear for the year. As we start to transition or warm up even more, I would say starting to get more so into the 60 to 70-degree range during the daytime, this is when we'll start to see the grass really start to reach its maximum growth rate, right? And so this is when I would start to consider we're able to repair any areas which we may need to focus on if there were any within the past season that essentially need to be touched up. This is also a great time to complete essentially any overhauls which we may need to complete, such as aerating, for example. If we have compacted soil, we want to make sure the grass is essentially actively growing and we're not heading into stressful conditions when completing some of these practices. More on this in the order of operations webinar. And then we'll start to see in the summertime here, the lawn will start to slow down a bit, right? So once the temps start to transition more so into the 80-degree range and above, especially if you don't receive much natural precipitation, we may start to see the lawn start to slow down. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is a bad thing, right? It just means that we need to take a step back. We might not be fertilizing quite as heavily, and we may be placing a heavier emphasis on essentially maintaining the lawn, not looking to seed, but really sort of reevaluating where we're currently at in the season. Again, continuing, if stressful conditions continue, we may see that decline in the growth rate continue. But then in the fall, essentially, once the temps start to decrease back into the 70-degree range again, we'll see the grass start to reach its maximum growth rate again, before ultimately slowing back down and entering dormancy. So if we put this all together, what I'd like to highlight is that there are a few different periods of time over the course of the season to keep in mind. So really late spring, early summer is going to be an ideal time to be considering repairing the lawn, completing the majority of actions, which will be the time period where there will be the most to complete, right? You'll be mowing, watering, fertilizing, but then also looking to repair any areas. And then that peak time of being able to complete these actions as well will also be in the early fall. So there isn't just one time period here where there's an optimal time to be completing actions. It's spread out over the course of the season. So getting started with watering, we'll pass it on over to Ivana.
Yeah. So this is always the first thing you kind of want to keep in mind when you're starting to care for your lawn. Watering is probably one of the most important, if not the most important practices for it. Improper watering can cause a lot of fungal issues, moisture buildup, which can render the soil anaerobic, which means it's having enough oxygen. It can also encourage more weeds in your lawn. So having a good, proper watering schedule will kind of help your grass, fight off drought, fight off weeds, and just stay that much more healthy. When thinking about your watering schedule, you want to go deep and infrequent. This will encourage deeper roots into the soil, and this will help things like, summer dormancy. Your grass will be able to access water that's a little bit deeper in the soil. And when we say deep, we say about zero 0.3 to zero 0.5 inches per session. For people without irrigation equipment, for the most part, in like the Northeast and things like that, your grass will be covered with normal precipitation. If you start to notice any sort of weakening of your grass, if you step on it and it kind of keeps your footprint, if it becomes a little more blue-gray, you may need to supplement that watering. You can get, really cheap hose attached sprinkler, just kind of throw it out there as needed. But for the most part, y'all should keep, the precipitation should keep your grass in check. And you can water based on temperature. So for people who maybe don't get as much irrigation, those kind of in the west that still have those cool season grasses, you do want to water based on temperature. So less than 70 degrees, you want to do once a week, about half an inch of water. As it starts to warm up, 2 times a week is usually the baseline. So for people in Colorado, that kind of place, usually you want to do about twice a week, spring to summer. If it does get over 85 degrees, think about watering 3 times, but do keep in mind to keep an eye out for any fungal issues that may start to emerge. And the best time to water will be the early morning. You want to discourage, any fungal issues. You don't want the water to sit on your grass for that long. So 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the perfect time. Lets your grass dry out over the course of the day. Doesn't leave a lot of water on the grass blades that can incur, future issues. Just, keep in mind your grass, more water isn't always a good thing for grass. There are kind of limitations on how much it can take. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Will.
And Yvonne, we actually had a question here regarding watering restrictions and essentially what can be done during the summertime with extreme summer heat, right? And so this is a good image. I have this queued up for you if you'd like to roll with it. So essentially, if we are practicing a deep and infrequent schedule here with this image, then this is what we would expect with a more frequent schedule. So your thoughts here in terms of why this would be the case and why deep and frequent is such a big focus.
Yeah, so deep and infrequent helps those roots, pull deeper into the soil. If you are getting watering restrictions, there's a couple different kinds. If it's something like you can only water on Tuesdays, that would be the time. Then I would really try to go maybe shoot for 0.75 inches just to, stretch that and let your grass take a little bit longer. And making sure, if it's something that's more, you can only water this amount each time. If they only let you water a little bit each time, you can increase the frequency if allowed. If not, you may just need to let it go dormant in the summer for a little bit. Not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do with global warming, but and that's why, deep watering is good for grass. You want to make sure those roots go deep. That way, when you do get those drought restrictions, those watering restrictions, it can maybe pull some water out of the soil that may not be accessible for ones that we're watering on a more shallow, frequent cycle.
In transitioning to mowing, an action which necessarily doesn't seem as complicated as you'd expect, right? And so I would say that it isn't necessarily an action which will require too much thought over the course of the season, but it is still useful to consider these 3 points. So the primary focus here with mowing is making sure that we have a sharp mower blade. And so what we tend to see is over the course of the season, especially once the heat starts to set in, potentially in the springtime, a bit more natural precipitation, perhaps the grass is a bit less stressed. And then as these stressors or the heat essentially adds a compounding effect, right? The grass starts to brown. So what we see when we submit pictures or customers submit pictures in, essentially are these torn grass blades. So you can imagine how if you have a dull mower blade, this is a two-part effect, right? Where essentially if we are cutting at the blades and essentially ripping the blades, and that's going to be stressful to the turf grass, right? But then also keep in mind, coming to our third point on this slide here, where we're most likely removing more than 1/3 of the blade per cut if we're essentially tugging at it, right? And so the focus here is we don't want to remove too much of the grass blade during one cut, because this will also set the grass up to be stressed. So When mowing, make sure we have that sharp mower blade. Don't remove more than 1/3 of the blade per cut. So in the springtime, if the grass is a little bit longer, we just want to make sure that we're not taking too much off with that initial cut, and then make sure to only cut as needed. So typically with cool season grasses, we recommend cutting once the blades get anywhere within the range of about 4 to 6 inches long, and then going down to a height of about 3 to 4 inches. Now, we certainly don't expect you to be out there with the measuring tape, measuring the grass blades to see how long it is, but focus here is just make sure that we aren't cutting too short and too much. And this will also help from a weed control perspective as well, essentially minimizing that amount of bare soil and increasing the grass canopy, if you will. And transitioning to fertilizing. So why fertilize? Well, not all soils are perfect, right? So with Sunday, we do follow MLSN, or minimum levels of sustainable nutrition guidelines. And this is why your soil test is such a crucial component of your plan. So this is just a reminder of, if you haven't submitted your soil test yet, we strongly recommend doing so, just so this can influence your plan, make sure we don't have any nutrient deficiencies to work through. In terms of when to apply these nutrient pouches, reference your My Plan page. So on your account page, you can see we have a snapshot of my plan page. You can see that I missed my fall Fortify application last year, so I'm reminded of this each time I log in. But this is really a great resource to be able to essentially track your progress over the year and make sure that we are applying all the nutrient pouches over the course of the season. Now, keep in mind that the application dates here are not set in stone. So the focus here, and we'll chat more about this in the Order of Operations webinar, is that we want to make sure that the grass is going to benefit from a fertilizer application. And what this means is making sure that the grass is essentially actively growing and that it's healthy and not stressed. So if for whatever reason we need to shift an application date, or if you have leftover pouches from previous seasons, no worries, we can certainly work to incorporate these. Always feel free to reach out to us and we can provide our thoughts and providing an updated application schedule for you.
All right, moving on to repairing. So this is something you will most likely need to do a few times over the course of the season. You know, pet areas might start to develop. You may have some leaves you needed to pull, and now there's an empty area. So this is just, a good thing to do to keep in mind over the course of the season. There are a few really common types of grasses for cool seasons, fine fescues, tall fescues, ryegrasses, bluegrass, things like that. So knowing what kind of grass you have is a pretty important factor in, repairing those areas. The great thing though about cool season grasses is that you can kind of mix and match. So if you do have a bluegrass lawn, but you notice there's an area that maybe gets a lot of sun, it's a little bit drier, you can overseed with a fescue, and adding that biodiversity into your lawn is a great way to kind of keep it healthier. This will just make sure, those grasses can kind of help out each other anytime there's an issue. So if it's a smaller area, you can use something like our Bear Repair, any sort of patching product, something that has, a little bit of mulch, a little bit extra fertilizer just to get that seed started. If you have a lot of large areas, or if you just want to overseed the season, spring and fall are both great times to overseed. You can use a bigger seed bag, use a spreader, or if you're cheap, you can use your hand like I do. It might look a little patchier, but save a little bit of money. Yeah, and we have, a few different kinds. We've got our Kentucky's Best, which is a bluegrass blend. We've got Shade Select, which is a great one for, under those trees in those shady spots where they might not get enough sun. Especially, if you've got a lot of trees, it's a little bit harder to keep that grass down there. So Shade Select is a great option for that. My favorite personally is our Lucky Lawn. That kind of has some micro clover in there. Clover, is technically a weed, but it can actually be really beneficial for your grass. It actually makes its own nitrogen, so it kind of helps fertilize that grass too. It's pretty cute. I like it. It doesn't get too tall, so I do recommend it. And of course, our jack of all trades, our main cool season grass that you see everywhere is our tall fescue. It's kind of a workhorse. It'll go basically anywhere. So if you're having trouble kind of figuring out what kind of grass you have in your lawn, or if you just want to get something that should work everywhere, go ahead and grab some fescue rescue. You can use that to overseed, and it'll be a really good option. And anytime you are repairing an area, just keep in mind if there's any debris there, if you've got some twigs from your trees or if you've got some dead grass, just make sure to rake that out. Just add a good bit of, a little bit of topsoil or compost just to help those seeds get a better start. Any questions on that section, Will?
Yeah, we do have a question here. So with this spring, right, this has been such an abnormal year where it's warming up much earlier, it seems like, but then we might have cooler temps starting to set in. What are your thoughts in terms of if we have a break in the weather, right, where if we have a week where it looks like it should be warmer, but then there's a potential for dropping into the 30s or even the 20s at night within the next couple of weeks, would you seed now or would you wait?
Typically, I would wait just so it doesn't sprout and then those cooler temperatures come and kill the grass. There is a practice called dormant seeding, which you can actually do that. While it is kind of frozen outside, it is a little bit colder so that the seed won't germinate yet. But if you want to go ahead and put it out, it will germinate once those temperatures start to warm up. So you could just leave that as an option if you see it's going to be freezing for a little bit. Go ahead and throw some seed down once temperatures warm up, that those seeds will be able to grow. The temperatures won't kill the seed if it's still inside the seed coat. It'll only be if you get warmth and then a dip. That's when the grass can be harmed from those breeding temperatures.
Perfect. And so I'm calling in from near Buffalo, New York. And so it's been this spring, we were up near 60 degrees the one day and then back into much cooler weather, right? And so I would say right now we're finally getting closer to that 50-degree high during the daytime. But as Ivana mentioned, the biggest concern here is just making sure that we're consistently into these warmer temps. So generally, I would say I tend to prefer having both daytime and nighttime temps to be above 50. It's okay if it dips a little bit lower than that, but that's really the golden standard in our eyes for the following 3 weeks or so. Is that what you'd say, Ivana?
For sure, yeah. I would say, yeah, above 50. If it dips to mid 40s, you're probably okay. But anything lower than that, then I would hold off for a little bit longer.
Perfect. And keep in mind that this is an action that you can complete not just in the springtime, right, but also in the fall. So if for whatever reason we need to give this complete this again in the fall, we can certainly do so. Or if you'd rather essentially see what we can get growing in the spring now and then reevaluate in the fall, that's certainly an option as well. Perfect. So then those were all 4 key steps that we had prepared for today. Are there any questions? I believe we did have a question just about general order of operations in terms of the products. In regards to that question, my plan page would be a great start for the majority of the nutrient pouches, but in terms of weed control and some of the other products, generally the primary focus is remove the weeds, look to repair the lawn if there are or if there's a large number of bare areas, and then look to incorporate the nutrient pouches afterwards. But there certainly we can adjust that as needed. So we'd be happy to chat in more detail if you have any additional questions.
Yeah. And this wasn't a question in this webinar, but this is something that we're going to start to see as temperatures warm up. But if you start to see any sort of snow mold, or if you start to see any sort of white or pink strange patches on your lawn, feel free to reach out to us. We have noticed a lot of areas in like Wyoming and things like that, they're starting to get some fungal issues since they kind of had that roller coaster, like a lot of us did in the country, where it got warmer and cooler and so on. So that's usually a pretty big breeding ground for fungal issues. So start to see something like that, reach out to us. We can kind of identify what kind it is. Depending on the kind of fungus, there's different care that goes into it. So.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. So that is everything that we had for today. Just as a summary here in terms of resources to utilize, we strongly recommend taking a look at our blog, The Shed. The articles on The Shed are great resources ranging from how to complete some of the recommended practices, such as how to audit your sprinkler system, how to test for compaction, if you feel the soil may be compacted, and then also other articles such as how to pick a plant out for your backyard. But Ivana, since you guys now have the webinar you hosted the other night on YouTube, I would recommend taking a look at that webinar if you need any plant suggestions. Ivana and Michelle did a great job hosting that. Secondly, our YouTube channel is a great resource providing product overview, so essentially how-to videos for how to utilize the products, how to complete some of the practices, again, such as how to audit your sprinkler system, and chats with our very own Dr. Frank Rossi from Cornell, my alma mater. And lastly, please feel free to submit any questions to webinars@guestsunday.com. We'd be thrilled to continue the conversation with all of you. And with that, we would love to see you at any future webinars as well, but please feel free to reach out with any questions and keep an eye out for the follow-up survey and follow-up email. Again, this is Lawn Care Basics for Cool Season Lawn. It was a pleasure, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.